Discovery in the Wilderness. Ethan Walker moved silently through the dense forest, the early morning mist curling around the gnarled trunks of pine and oak. His boots sank into the damp earth with every step, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot the only sound to break the profound hush. Beside him, Rex, his loyal hunting dog, padded cautiously, nose to the ground, ears twitching at every rustle. Out here, in the uncharted frontier, silence was both a companion and a warning. Ethan's life had been one of solitude, shaped by necessity and a stubborn pride. Years ago, he had traded the safety of town life for the wild unknown, carving a modest cabin from the surrounding wilderness. Days were spent tracking game or tending to a small homestead. Nights passed by the fire, the crackle of flames, and the quiet breathing of Rex's only company. Yet, despite the isolation, he had never felt lonely. The forest had a rhythm, a pulse that suited him. That rhythm, however, was about to be interrupted. Rex suddenly froze, ears pricked forward, tail stiff. A low growl rumbled from his throat, the kind that warned of something unusual. Ethan followed his dog's gaze, scanning the misty clearing ahead. That's when he saw her. She lay crumpled near the riverbank, her dress torn and muddied, face pale, lips pressed against the earth in a shallow gasp. At first, Ethan thought her a wandering spirit, a trick of the morning fog. But the weak, uneven breath she drew told him otherwise. She was alive, but barely. His heart tightened. "Rex, stay," he whispered, kneeling beside her. The dog sat obediently, eyes alert, body tense. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he felt for a pulse. Relief washed over him. It was faint but steady. "Hang on," he murmured. "I've got you." Carefully, he lifted her, balancing her weight against his own. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open, hazel orbs clouded with pain and fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost fading. "Help me." Ethan nodded, brushing damp hair from her face. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." Her gaze searched his, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Ethan noted her delicate hands, the faint bruises along her arms, and a locket that hung loosely around her neck. Something about her seemed out of place here in the wild solitude of his life. He carried her to the cabin, each step careful not to jostle her fragile frame. Rex trailed close, whining softly, as if sensing the urgency. Inside, Ethan laid her on the cot he had reserved for emergencies, a habit formed from years of tending to injuries, mostly his own or those of travelers who'd passed through. He ripped strips from a spare blanket to cushion her and wrapped it around her shivering form. She closed her eyes, shivering, and Ethan noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of fear. Or was it shame? He couldn't tell. "Do you need water?" he asked gently, filling a cup from the basin near the fireplace. She took it, drinking in small, careful sips. Her eyes lingered on him, searching, hesitant, as if measuring his intentions. I didn't mean to," she began, voice trembling. "I was running." "From what?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected she carried secrets, the kind that could unravel quickly in the wrong hands. Her lips pressed together, and she said nothing more. A shiver ran down her spine, and Ethan realized she was exhausted, physically and emotionally. He wanted to ask questions, to probe, but the right moment wasn't now. Right now, she needed shelter, warmth, and the safety that only he could provide in this secluded corner of the world. Rex nuzzled her hand, and she allowed a small, hesitant smile. The dog's warmth seemed to comfort her, a brief reprieve from the terror that lingered in her gaze. Ethan watched, silent and watchful, feeling a mixture of protectiveness and something he hadn't experienced in years: curiosity. As night fell, the cabin glowed softly with the firelight, shadows dancing across the rough-hewn walls. Ethan tended to her quietly, setting a pot of broth to warm over the flames. She slept fitfully, murmuring words he could not decipher. The locket around her neck caught the firelight, glinting with initials he couldn't yet make out, small hints of a life she had left behind. Ethan felt a strange unease settle in his chest. He had saved her life, yes, but the question remained, who was she, and what danger had driven her into the wilderness alone? He could feel it in his bones that this was only the beginning. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine, earth, and something unknown. Ethan knew, with a quiet certainty, that the arrival of this mysterious woman would change his life, and perhaps the very rhythm of the frontier itself. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder whether he was ready for that change. Healing and connection. Clara's first full day in Ethan's cabin began with the pale light of dawn spilling through the rough-hewn window. She stirred slowly, wincing as a dull ache spread through her body. Her hands brushed the blanket wrapped around her, and for a moment she lingered on the warmth that came not only from the fire, now reduced to glowing embers, but from the quiet presence of Ethan and Rex. Ethan had already been awake, tending to the small wood stove. The smell of freshly brewed tea wafted through the cabin. He glanced at her as she opened her eyes, noting the way the morning light caught the faint traces of tears on her face. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of careful concern. "Sleep well." She hesitated, then nodded, eyes flicking to the cup of tea he held out. Her fingers wrapped around it, and she sipped, savoring the warmth and the faint bitterness. Clara's movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were measuring each moment, calculating each gesture. Ethan observed quietly, recognizing a kind of caution born from fear and survival. "You're stronger than you look," he remarked gently. Rex agrees. The dog patted over, pressing his muzzle to her hand. She allowed a small, uncertain smile to grace her lips, a gesture so fleeting it could have been missed. Yet for Ethan, it was enough, a spark of trust forming amidst the lingering tension. As the day unfolded, Ethan set about establishing a routine. He had his tasks, gathering water, repairing a broken section of the cabin roof, and preparing food, but Clara proved to be an eager, if hesitant, participant. She carried firewood with surprising steadiness, stirred the pot of stew with careful precision, and even offered a quiet observation about the placement of herbs on the windowsill. Each task revealed glimpses of her character, resourceful, patient, and quietly intelligent. Their conversations were tentative at first. Clara spoke in fragments about her past, the journey that had brought her here, the letters she had sent that went unanswered, the loneliness that had driven her across rivers and forests. Ethan listened, probing gently, yet always mindful of her comfort. She avoided the subject of her husband entirely, and the hesitation in her gaze betrayed a story she was unwilling or perhaps afraid to tell. Rex, ever vigilant, seemed to sense the unspoken tension between them. The dog remained close to Clara, nudging her when she faltered and watching Ethan as if guarding both of them from the uncertainties that lingered outside the cabin walls. In a strange way, the dog became the silent mediator of their budding connection, bridging the gap between caution and trust. By afternoon, the two found themselves at the edge of the forest, collecting wild herbs for the stew. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across the soft earth. A shared laugh erupted when Clara tripped over a root, and Ethan caught her, steadying her with hands that lingered just a moment too long. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of vulnerability, of shared humanity, and perhaps something more dangerous, attraction. Yet beneath the warmth, a subtle tension remained. Ethan noticed the faint marks on her wrists, the way her fingers lingered near the locket at her neck. Questions pressed at the edges of his mind. Who was she, really? And what kind of man had made her flee into the wilderness, alone and desperate? He refrained from asking directly, instead choosing to observe, to let trust grow in its own time. As evening approached, the cabin glowed with firelight once more. Ethan handed Clara a bowl of the stew they had prepared together, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite, her gaze occasionally drifting to the forest outside. For the first time since her arrival, there was a fleeting sense of ease, a fragile comfort in the presence of someone who neither demanded nor judged. But trust, Ethan knew, was a delicate thing, and secrets he could feel in his bones were not so easily left behind. The faint glint of a hidden ring beneath her sleeve caught his eye as she stirred the stew, a small, almost imperceptible reminder that her story was incomplete. Clara, too, felt the pull of something she had tried to resist for years, the sense of being seen, of being cared for, of sharing a space where judgment was absent, even if only temporarily. Yet the shadow of another life lingered, a life tethered to a man whose presence she could not fully escape. As night settled over the forest, Ethan cleaned the last of the dishes, his mind circling back to the ring, the letter she had avoided showing him, and the quiet way she had looked at Rex with a mixture of gratitude and cautious affection. He knew the answers would not come easily, and that her story, like the wilderness itself, was layered and complex. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, whispering through the pines and carrying with it a sense of inevitability. The quiet night, the firelight, the shared moments of labor and laughter, they were binding them together, subtly, inexorably. Yet in the depth of Ethan's gaze lingered a question he dared not voice aloud. Could trust, and perhaps love, survive the truths that Clara had yet to reveal? And somewhere deep inside, he knew that the answer would define not only the next day, but the very course of their lives. Secrets revealed. The morning sun filtered through the cabin window, casting thin golden streaks across the wooden floor. Clara stirred, careful not to wake Ethan, though he was already awake, seated at the table with a leather-bound journal in hand. The faint smell of pine, smoke mingled with the earthy aroma of brewing coffee, a comforting normality that belied the storm of unspoken truths lingering between them. Clara rose quietly, her movements measured. The bruises along her arms had faded slightly, but her eyes carried a shadow that no sunlight could dissipate. She caught Ethan's gaze as she reached for the cup of coffee he had prepared. In that brief moment, she felt both seen and scrutinized. Ethan's expression was calm, almost unreadable, yet his eyes betrayed a careful curiosity, an unspoken question hovering between them. "I should tell you," Clara said finally, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed, "about who I am and why I ran." Ethan leaned back, attentive but silent, allowing her the space to speak. Rex padded closer, resting his head near her feet, sensing the gravity of the moment. Clara inhaled sharply, the weight of her past pressing down on her. I'm married," she admitted, the words tasting bitter. "To Samuel Bennett. He isn't the man I thought he was. Controlling, harsh. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't live. I tried to leave quietly, but I didn't expect this." She gestured vaguely toward the cabin and her worn clothes. "I didn't want anyone to see me like this, to know I was running from him." Ethan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in a deliberate attempt to hold back judgment. He understood the complexity of human desperation. He had seen it in the forest many times before, in travelers and settlers alike. But this was different. She was not a stranger. She was someone he had saved, someone whose life now intertwined with his own. "Samuel," Ethan murmured, testing the name on his tongue. "Has he been looking for you?" Clara shook her head, though her eyes betrayed the truth. "I don't know. I haven't dared check. I just ran. I thought if I could reach somewhere remote, maybe I could start over, even if it was only for a little while." The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of her confession. Ethan set the journal aside and walked toward the window, staring out at the trees beyond. He could sense the danger that shadowed her every step, the fragile balance between freedom and pursuit. His own feelings were shifting subtly, imperceptibly. Protectiveness had begun to mingle with attraction, an awareness that he was drawn to her despite the complications. Clara followed his gaze, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly at his silence. She wanted to explain more, to confess every fear and every hope she had carried across the wilderness. but words faltered in her throat. Instead, she simply watched him, wondering if he could see the truth without it being spoken aloud. Rex, ever intuitive, nudged Ethan's leg, drawing his attention back to the room. Ethan crouched, letting the dog sniff his hands, then glanced at Clara. "I saved you because you needed it," he said finally, his voice steady. "Not because I expect anything. But now that I know what you're running from, I need to know you're safe, and that starts with honesty." Her breath hitched. "I've never been honest with anyone," she admitted. "Not about him, not about my feelings. I didn't know how." Ethan's gaze softened, a mixture of understanding and cautious restraint. "Then start with me. Just the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the cabin and the faint whistle of wind through the trees. Clara reached for her locket, twisting it gently in her fingers before letting it fall into her palm. "He's married, but he's dangerous," she whispered. "I thought leaving would keep me alive, and yet I feel guilty even thinking about wanting someone else." Ethan's heart tightened. The moral lines were blurred, the right path unclear. He had grown protective, even fond, yet every instinct warned him to tread carefully. Love, he realized, could be both a lifeline and a trap, particularly when entwined with deception, fear, and the shadows of someone else's claim. Hours passed in a tense, quiet rhythm. They worked together in the cabin, preparing food, repairing the roof, sorting supplies, but now every gesture carried an unspoken weight. Hands brushed while passing tools, eyes met with a lingering intensity. Even Rex's subtle nudges seemed to act as a bridge between them, gentle reminders that the world outside was dangerous, but within this small space, trust could grow. As evening approached, Clara looked at Ethan, a mixture of relief and fear in her eyes. "Thank you," she murmured, "for saving me, for listening, for not judging me." Ethan offered a small, tentative smile. "I'm not here to judge. I'm here to make sure you're safe. The rest we'll figure out." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pine needles, a reminder that the wilderness held both freedom and peril. And somewhere in the distance, Ethan could feel the subtle pull of consequences, Samuel's shadow, the choices they had yet to make, and the undeniable tension that had begun to simmer between them. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to hope that perhaps safety and something more, affection, connection, even love, might exist in the forest beneath the watchful eyes of a man who had saved her life. And Ethan, standing at the threshold of choice and desire, knew that the next step would not be simple. The lines between right and wrong, protection and passion, loyalty and temptation were beginning to blur, and neither of them could predict where the path would lead. Choices and consequences. The forest was quiet that morning, mist curling between the trunks like ghostly fingers. Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, Rex at his side, ears alert to every distant sound. The tension in the air was palpable. Something had shifted overnight. Clara, sitting near the cabin doorway, sensed it too. Her fingers fidgeted with the locket she had grown to trust as a talisman, a reminder of the life she had left behind and the choices she now faced. A sudden noise, a sharp crack of a branch, made Rex growl and drop into a defensive stance. Ethan's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the wind. Someone was approaching. Samuel Bennett stepped into the clearing, tall and imposing, eyes hard, every movement deliberate. Clara froze, fear etching her features. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, the weight of unspoken communication passing between them. "Stay calm. Trust me." "You shouldn't have run," Samuel said, voice low and controlled, yet carrying an undercurrent of menace. His gaze swept over the cabin, over Clara, finally resting on Ethan. "And you've involved yourself where you don't belong." Ethan's jaw tightened, his grip on the rifle at his side firm, but not threatening, yet. "She isn't yours to control," he said, voice even. "She made a choice." Clara's heart pounded. The man who had haunted her thoughts, whose presence had driven her across rivers and forests, was finally here. And standing between them was Ethan, the man who had saved her life, who had offered safety, who had stirred feelings she hadn't dared to acknowledge. Samuel took a step closer. "You think running changes anything? She belongs to me." "No," Clara interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. "I don't belong to you. You don't get to decide what I do with my life." The air seemed to thicken as words hung between them. Ethan's eyes flicked to Clara, silently encouraging her, offering her the agency she had long denied herself. For the first time, she felt the power of choice, of autonomy, tempered by the support of someone who genuinely cared. Rex barked sharply, breaking the tension, a reminder that danger could strike at any moment. Samuel's gaze followed the dog, then returned to Clara and Ethan. He realized that force alone would not win this confrontation. He hesitated, calculating, and in that pause, Clara saw an opportunity. "I'm leaving," she said firmly, stepping forward. "And no one can stop me. Not you. Not fear. Not anything." Ethan stayed close, a silent sentinel, letting her words carry the authority she had claimed for herself. Samuel's jaw clenched, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief, before he finally turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving only the faint echo of his boots on the path. Clara exhaled, a tremor of relief passing through her body. She turned to Ethan, eyes wide, lips parting, unsure if she should speak or simply allow the weight of what had just happened to settle. "You did it," Ethan said softly, his voice gentle. "You took your life back." Clara's shoulders sagged, and for the first time since she had arrived, a genuine smile appeared. "I didn't think I could," she admitted. "I didn't think I had the strength." Ethan reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "You did, and you do." His eyes held hers, honest and unwavering. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The forest seemed to exhale with them, the tension melting into a quiet calm. Rex nudged Clara's hand, tail wagging slowly, as if approving the unspoken agreement between them. The dog had been a bridge between fear and trust, and now he watched them with the contented patience of a loyal companion who knew they were safe. They returned to the cabin, side by side, the weight of danger lifted, but the reality of their choices remaining. Clara removed the locket, holding it for a moment before setting it carefully on the table, a symbol of the past she no longer allowed to control her. Ethan set a hand gently on hers. "Freedom comes with responsibility," he said, "and trust. You've earned both." Clara's gaze softened, a mixture of gratitude, affection, and something deeper, hope. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you trust me?" Ethan smiled, a warmth that reached his eyes and softened the rugged lines of his face. "I do, and I think I've been waiting for this, waiting to meet someone brave enough to fight for themselves and kind enough to let me fight with them." Even in the quiet aftermath, the forest remained alive. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the soft trickle of the river. Life continued, indifferent to past mistakes and future uncertainties. And in the heart of the wilderness, two people who had been strangers, then allies, then something more, found a fragile, enduring connection. That night, the firelight cast long shadows on the cabin walls, illuminating the path they had traveled and the choices they had made. Clara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, the warmth of the cabin, the fire, and the presence of Rex creating a sanctuary. They were not perfect, and the world beyond the forest would bring new challenges. But in this moment, trust and affection had triumphed. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, Ethan allowed himself a quiet hope. Life could be dangerous, love could be complicated, but courage, choice, and loyalty had brought them here. For now, that was enough.